Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 2nd of Jan 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now this particular article appears as an editorial on page number 8. The title of the article is Signs of a Turnaround. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Economy under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues. Now this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because the Reserve Bank of India has published a report known as the Financial Stability Report. It is to be noted that this particular report is published half yearly by the RBI, which means that this report is published twice in a year. And as the name suggests, this particular report analyzes the macroeconomic stability of the Indian economy. So as part of this video analysis, we shall basically focus on three aspects. Firstly, we'll analyze the health of the Indian banks, wherein we'll analyze the soundness and resilience of the banks in India in terms of the non-performing assets. Secondly, we'll look into certain concerns and challenges raised in this particular article. Further, as part of the Financial Stability Report, the RBI publishes an indicator known as the Banking Stability Indicator. This particular indicator analyzes the stability of the Indian banks. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we shall understand as to what exactly is the Banking Stability Indicator and what components are considered by the RBI in order to calculate this stability indicator. So let us start our video analysis with the first aspect of the article, wherein we'll analyze as to what has happened to the financial health of the Indian banks, and more importantly, whether the non-performing assets of the banks have declined. As you all know, the asset quality of the Indian banks has been a cause of concern in the Indian economy since last 4 to 5 years. In this regard, this particular report highlights that the asset quality of the Indian banks has improved for the first time since March 2015. Hence, based upon this particular report, we can be optimistic that the financial health of the Indian banks would be improving in future. This report has highlighted that there is broad-based decline in both the gross non-performing assets as well as the net non-performing assets of the Indian banks. It is to be remembered here is that in one of the earlier DNS video, I had discussed about the differences between the gross non-performing assets and the net non-performing asset, wherein the net non-performing asset is calculated as the gross non-performing asset minus the provisioning amount, that is the amount kept by the banks in order to cover the risk arising from the non-performing assets. So this report has highlighted that both the gross non-performing assets as well as the net non-performing assets of the banks have seen a decline. And if you can see here, at the start of the financial year, the gross non-performing assets of the Indian banks was at 11.5%. However, by September 2018, it has got reduced to 10.8%. And the report further highlights that the gross non-performing assets is further expected to reduce to 10.3% by March 2019. Now, this particular image has been taken as a screenshot from the Financial Stability Report published by the RBI. And as you can clearly see here, the gross non-performing ratio of the public sector banks, private banks as well as the foreign banks have seen a decline, wherein the gross non-performing ratio of all the scheduled commercial banks in India has got reduced to 10.8%. And when it comes to the net non-performing ratio, the net NPAs have got reduced to the 5.3% for all the scheduled commercial banks. So this clearly shows that the health of the banks in India has been improving, and hence it bodes well for the overall Indian economy. Now the findings of this particular report can be considered to be a good sign for the Indian economy. This is because if you look at the financial market in India, it is basically dominated by the banking sector, wherein the banking sector provides for the majority amount of credit in India, which means to say the overall growth of Indian economy depends upon the overall financial health of the banking sector. However, in last 4 to 5 years, the banking sector in India had seen a drastic increase in its non-performing assets, because of which concerns were raised with respect to its adverse impact on the macroeconomic stability of the Indian economy. Which means to say, if the non-performing assets of the Indian banks would have increased, it would have adversely affected the overall stability of the Indian economy. In this regard, the findings of this particular report clearly highlights that the macroeconomic stability of Indian economy would not be threatened in future. Apart from that, the higher non-performing assets of the Indian banks had led to overall decline in the credit flow, which means to say the amount of loans given by the banks had seen a decline in the recent years, and this had adversely affected the investment rate in the Indian economy. And as you all know, the rate of investment plays a very important part in the growth of Indian economy. Hence, the findings of this particular report, which highlights that the non-performing assets of the banks have reduced, shows that the future growth of Indian economy would not be adversely affected. This could further be analyzed by looking at the credit and the deposit growth of the different banks in India. And if you look at the credit growth of the Indian banks, all the scheduled commercial banks have seen an increase in their credit growth, wherein the highest amount of credit growth has been displayed by the private sector banks. However, the important point to be noted here is that even the public sector banks have also registered an increase in the credit growth. And if one looks at the deposit growth, in September 2018, even the deposits of all the scheduled commercial banks have seen an increase, wherein the highest amount of increase in the deposits has been seen by the private sector banks. And even the public sector banks have also seen an increase in their deposit growth. Hence, the important findings of the Financial Stability Report is that both the gross non-performing assets as well as the net non-performing assets of the banks have reduced. And this is further augmented by increase in the credit as well as the deposit growths of the banks. Clearly, all these facts and figures highlight that the financial health of the Indian banks has been improving. And this can be attributed to a number of steps taken by the government and the RBI, such as the implementation of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code as well as the prompt corrective action initiated by the RBI. Now coming to second aspect of the article related to concerns and challenges. Even though there has been a decline in the gross non-performing ratio as well as the net non-performing ratio, the gross non-performing ratio of the public sector banks is still higher at 14.8% as shown in this particular image. Now, this clearly shows that the financial health of the public sector banks is still a cause of concern for the Indian economy. And this is a problem because the public sector banks comprises of almost 75% of the banking assets in India. The higher NPAs of the public sector banks can be attributed to the fact that the public sector banks have a higher exposure to the large borrowers. Now, according to the RBI, large borrowers are those entities that have cumulatively borrowed loans more than 50 crores. If one looks at the public sector banks in India, they account for almost 55% of the loans given to the large borrowers. However, the main problem with the large borrowers is that their share in the gross NPAs is very high. And if you can look at this particular image, which shows the share of large borrowers in the loan portfolios of the banks, as on September 2018, 83% of the gross NPAs are accounted by the large borrowers. So because of the fact that the large borrowers have defaulted on their loan repayment, the public sector banks have accumulated a higher amount of the gross non-performing ratio. So this particular report here clearly highlights that the NPAs of the public sector banks is still higher and hence needs to improve. Now coming to the banking stability indicator, which is one of the indicator published by the RBI in its financial stability report. Let us first understand as to what this indicator actually does. If one looks at the NPAs in India, most of the NPAs are concentrated in only some of the sectors of the Indian economy. Now these sectors could be mining, industries, construction companies, etc. Wherein these sectors may have received loans from multiple banks and not just one particular bank. Hence, a default on these loans by any one sector can put a significant pressure on the balance sheet of the several banks. Hence, a default on loans by one sector has a capability to adversely affect multiple banks. Similarly, one has to understand that the banking and financial system in India is highly interconnected, which means to say failure of any one particular bank can adversely affect the stability of all other banks. Hence, in this regard, the banking stability indicator measures the interdependence of the banking sector in India. If you look at the definition of the banking stability indicator given by the RBI, it is defined as the expected number of banks that could become distressed given that at least one bank has become distressed, which means that this particular indicator measures as to how many banks are likely to get affected on account of failure of a particular bank. So as a banking stability indicator increases, what this means is more number of banks are likely to get affected on account of the failure of a single bank. So as a banking stability indicator increases, it means that the banking sector in India is more interdependent and failure of one bank has a capability to affect multiple banks. Further, if you look at the components of the banking stability indicator, this particular indicator takes into account 5 parameters. These parameters are the efficiency of the banks, profitability, the soundness, liquidity, as well as the asset quality. Wherein, as you can see in this particular image, the width of each of these dimensions signifies its contribution towards the risk. So as on September 2018, one main concern for the banking stability indicator happens to be the asset quality of the banks in India, and this is followed by the profitability parameter. And further, as we have discussed, the increase in the indicator value or the banking stability indicator shows that the banking system in India is less stable. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to the banking stability indicator. Based upon the discussion which we had so far, these 3 questions shall be your prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to these questions. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The first question here is, consider the following statements related to the banking stability indicator. The first statement here is, it measures the expected number of banks that could become distressed if one bank fails. And as we have discussed, this particular statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, an increase in the indicator value means that the banking sector is more stable. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because an increase in the indicator value would mean that the banking sector has become more unstable. Hence, accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is one only. Now coming to second question here, the question here is, consider the following statements. The first statement is, the NPAs of the private sector banks is higher than the public sector banks. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because, as we have discussed, the NPAs of the public sector banks is much higher than the NPAs of the private sector banks. The second statement here is, the net NPA is always lower than the gross NPA. Now we have seen here that net NPA is calculated as the gross NPA minus the provisioning amount. Hence, the net NPA would always be lower than the gross NPA. Hence, in this regard, this particular statement here is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. And coming to the last question here, the question is, which among the following agencies published the Financial Stability Report in India? And the correct answer to this question is D, that is RBI. Thus, having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now move to the next article. Now this particular article appears as a lead article on page number 8. The title of the article is The Bilateral Transformation. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 International Relations under the subsection India and its Neighbourhood. As you all know, recently elections were conducted in Bangladesh, and the outcome of these elections was eagerly awaited by India, since the outcome of these elections would have decided the future trajectory of Indo-Bangladesh relations. Now this particular article here has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the re-election of the Awami League government led by Sheikh Hasina. Now the re-election of the Sheikh Hasina government is a good news for India, since it would enable us to take our multifaceted relationship forward. However, at the same time, it also presents the two countries with an opportunity to sort out some of the concerns and challenges. Hence, accordingly, the main focus of this particular article is that firstly, it highlights the growing relationship between the two countries and how this relationship can be taken forward, and at the same time, it also highlights certain concerns and challenges in their bilateral relationship. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us focus on these two aspects of the article. Further, it is to be noted that in UPSC Mains 2013, a question on Indo-Bangladesh relationship has already been asked. Similarly, an expected UPSC mains question from this particular article could be: explain the aspects of the convergences and divergences of the Indo-Bangladesh relations. Now, coming to the convergences in the Indo-Bangladesh relationship, now Bangladesh is considered to be quite important for India's foreign policy from multiple perspectives. For example, Bangladesh can act as an important link between South Asia and Southeast Asia due to its geostrategic location. Hence, in this regard, Bangladesh becomes quite critical for India's Act East policy. So, having good relationship with Bangladesh would enable India to improve its trade and economic relation with Southeast Asian countries such as Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. Apart from that, Bangladesh is extremely critical for the development and the security situation in the northeastern part of India. Further, Bangladesh is also a member of a large number of regional groups such as the BIMSTEC as well as BBIN, which stand for Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, wherein these four countries are trying to sort out the connectivity issues. Wherein recently, under the BBIN framework, India has signed the motor vehicle agreement with Bangladesh as well as Nepal in order to improve the trade connectivity. The economic relationship between the two countries has seen a fillip in the recent years, wherein Bangladesh has emerged as India's largest trade partner in the South Asia, wherein the annual bilateral trade between the two countries presently stands at $9 billion. Further, under the South Asian Free Trade Agreement, India has enabled Bangladesh to export its goods to India at 0% customs duty, and this has enabled Bangladesh to increase its exports to around $900 million every year. Further, India has consistently been giving a line of credit for undertaking development projects in Bangladesh. Apart from that, India has been exporting power or electricity to Bangladesh, wherein the annual export of electricity to Bangladesh is presently around 3,500 megawatt. Further, the growing maturity in the Indo-Bangladesh relationship can be seen from the fact that these two countries have come together in order to resolve their border dispute, wherein in 2015, India and Bangladesh have signed a land boundary agreement providing for the exchange of enclaves. Further, as we discussed, Bangladesh plays a very critical role in the security scenario of the northeastern states, wherein some of the terrorist groups such as ULFA use the Bangladeshi territory in order to stage terror attacks in India. In this regard, the Awami League government of the Sheikh Hasina has been so far been helpful for India. This is because they have cracked down on all the anti-India groups, thus ensuring that the security situation in the northeastern part of India remains immune from such terror attacks. Further, as you know, China has been trying to increase its influence in India's neighborhood, and this has led to heightened concerns for India. Hence, in this regard, the Sheikh Hasina government of Bangladesh has been quite helpful and has taken India's concerns into account. For example, even Bangladesh has raised concerns over the Chinese projects on Brahmaputra. And more importantly, unlike Pakistan, Bangladesh has stayed away from Chinese loans that usually lead to the debt trap. Further, the Indian government is implementing a large number of development projects in Bangladesh. Prominent among them are the Padma Multipurpose Bridge, the Akhora Agartala Rail Link. Further, the Indian government is currently in negotiation with Bangladesh in order to extend the National Waterway 1 towards Bangladesh. India has signed an agreement with Russia and Bangladesh in order to construct the Rupar nuclear plant in Bangladesh. So all these facets highlight the fact that there has been growing convergence in the Indo-Bangladesh relations. Now coming to certain concerns and challenges in the Indo-Bangladesh relationship. Now one of the main concern in the Indo-Bangladesh relationship is with respect to Chinese presence in the Indian subcontinent, wherein as you already know, China has built the naval ports in Gwadar in Pakistan as well as Hambantota in Sri Lanka. Apart from that, China has been demanding Bangladesh to allow it to build the Chittagong port. So building of this Chittagong port in Bangladesh by China could have negative repercussions on India's dominance in South Asia. Apart from that, Bangladesh has also emerged as one of the major importer of Chinese defense equipment, which clearly highlights that the defense relationship between China and Bangladesh has been increasing. The second concern is with respect to Rohingya refugees, wherein currently Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh has become the world's largest refugee camp. In this regard, Bangladesh has been asking India to pressurize Myanmar to take back these Rohingya refugees as well as to end the genocide. However, India has so far been reluctant to exert pressure on Myanmar since it requires Myanmar's help in completing the connectivity projects with the Southeast Asia. Hence, the Rohingya refugees has become one of the main point of concern between India and Bangladesh. The third concern is with respect to Bangladesh's reluctance to improve the connectivity in the northeastern part of India. And as you can see the map here, Bangladesh provides the shortest route between West Bengal and Tripura. However, Bangladesh has so far tightly regulated and hindered the connectivity in the northeastern part of India, which means that the shortest route between West Bengal and Tripura has so far remained underutilized. The next concern is with respect to the illegal Bangladeshi immigrants, wherein the Bangladesh government has so far been unable to stop its citizens from crossing over to northeastern part of India. And this has in turn led to demographic change in the northeastern part of India, leading to the ethnic strifes. Apart from that, even though India and Bangladesh share more than 50 rivers, these two countries have been unable to sign a comprehensive agreement on the sharing of river water such as the Teesta. So these are some of the divergences in the Indo-Bangladesh relations. So based upon the discussion which we had so far, you can try attempting this particular expected UPSC mains question. Having analyzed all the aspects of this particular article, let us now move to the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Boost to Plain Packaging. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Government Policies and Interventions. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because recently some of the countries such as Australia, Thailand, and Saudi Arabia have adopted the plain packaging of tobacco products. It is to be noted that the plain packaging of tobacco products has been provided under the WHO Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, wherein the plain packaging of tobacco products basically prohibits usage of any kind of logos, colors, or brand images on the cigarette packets. The basic idea here is to reduce the attractiveness of the cigarette packets or the tobacco products. So countries such as Australia, Thailand, and Saudi Arabia have adopted plain packaging of tobacco products in order to dissuade the people from smoking. Now the plain packaging of tobacco products become relevant for India. This is because India is considered to be the second largest consumer of tobacco products after China. Apart from that, India has also seen a highest rate of oral cancer across the world. Hence, in order to stop this menace, the government of India has taken a number of initiatives. For example, it has increased the size of the graphic pictorial warnings by 85% in April 2016, wherein all the cigarette packets sold in India are required to have pictorial warnings related to the adverse effect of smoking on one's health. Apart from that, the government of India has launched the National Tobacco Control Program in 2008 in order to create awareness about the harmful effects of tobacco consumption. The government has also prohibited smoking in public places, and more importantly, India has ratified the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. However, in spite of these measures undertaken by the government, the tobacco consumption in India has not drastically been cut down. Hence, in this regard, there is a need to think about the plain packaging of tobacco products even in India as well. So these are some of the aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the plain packaging of tobacco products. The first statement is, it prohibits the use of any logos, colors, or brand images on the cigarette packets. And as we have discussed, this particular statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, it is provided under the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Even this particular statement here is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is C, that is both 1 and 2. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 8. The title of the article is Strange Bedfellows in West Asia. This particular article highlights that the two regional rivals in West Asia, that is Israel and Saudi Arabia, have recently started cooperating on a number of issues. Hence, in this regard, this particular article becomes important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, International Relations, under its subsection India and its neighborhood. As you all know, both Saudi Arabia and Israel are considered to be regional rivals in West Asia, wherein both these countries are vying for the regional dominance in West Asia. And this is on account of number of reasons. In several Arab wars which are fought between the Arab countries and Israel, Saudi Arabia acted as a leader. So traditionally, Saudi Arabia and Israel have been opposed to each other. Saudi Arabia has also refused to acknowledge the statehood of Israel. And more importantly, even today, these two countries do not have any kind of official diplomatic engagements such as formation of embassy. However, this particular article here has highlighted that both Saudi Arabia and Israel have started cooperating on number of issues leading to improvement in their bilateral relationship. Hence, in this regard, this particular article here basically analyzes the reasons for the growing cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, coming to the reasons for the growing cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Israel, one probable reason for these two countries to come together can be attributed to the fact that USA is a common friend of both Saudi Arabia and Israel, wherein USA has been encouraging these two countries to come together and cooperate on a large number of regional issues. So the fact that US acts as a common friend for both these countries has enabled them to come together. The other reason for these two countries to come together can be linked to the Iranian factor, when both Saudi Arabia and Israel see Iran as a common enemy. For example, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are vying for regional dominance of the Muslim world. Similarly, Israel considers Iran as its enemy because of the Iranian support or the funding to the terrorist organization Hezbollah. So, because of the fact that both these countries view Iran as a common enemy, they have come together in order to reduce the Iranian influence in the West Asia. Further, the ruling establishment in Saudi Arabia, led by the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has called for the greater cooperation with Israel in order to tackle the regional issues. Apart from that, there has been change in attitude of Israel towards Saudi Arabia. This is because Israel wants a lasting solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, for which Israel requires the support of Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia takes the lead in finding a long-lasting solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, it is likely that other Arab countries would also follow the lead of Saudi Arabia, since Saudi Arabia is considered as the leader of Arab countries. Lastly, there has been change in the attitude of the other Arab countries towards Israel. For example, UAE has been calling for greater economic cooperation between the Arab countries and Israel. So these are some of the reasons for the growing cooperation between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now the next article appears on page number 4. The title of the article is The Parliamentary Committee Irked by States' Insensitivity to Western Ghats. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Environment under the subsection Environmental Conservation. Now this particular article here basically highlights that the Parliamentary Committee on the Government Assurances has highlighted that the Western Ghats states have not taken adequate measures in order to protect the unique biodiversity of the Western Ghats. Now, this particular article is important because in previous year UPSC mains as well as prelims, questions have been asked with respect to the environmental management. For example, in UPSC mains 2013, question was asked with respect to the concept of go and no-go areas. Whereas in prelims 2016, a question was asked with respect to the Gadgil Committee and the Kasturi Rangan Committee. And in prelims 2018, there was a question related to the Parliamentary Committee. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because the Parliamentary Committee on the Government Assurances has stated that the Western Ghats states have failed to earmark the ecologically sensitive zone of the Western Ghats as no-go areas. It is to be remembered here that the Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel led by Madhav Gadgil had recommended that 64% of the Western Ghats area has to be declared as ecologically sensitive zone. However, this particular committee was criticized for being too environment friendly. Subsequently, the government appointed the Kasturi Rangan Committee, wherein the Kasturi Rangan Committee sought to balance the two concerns of development and environmental protection by relaxing the environmental regulation regime put forward by Gadgil Committee, wherein the Kasturi Rangan Committee proposed that 37% of the Western Ghats should be declared as ecologically sensitive zone. Now coming to the concept of the ecologically sensitive zone, the ecologically sensitive zone is an ecologically fragile area around the protected areas such as the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. And usually the ecologically sensitive zones can be considered as zone of transition from the areas of high protection to the areas of lesser protection. One important aspect with respect to ecologically sensitive zone is that the government regulates the activities which can be undertaken in such zones rather than prohibiting the activities. The basic idea is to regulate certain activities around the protected areas so as to minimize the negative impacts of such activities on the fragile ecosystem. And more importantly, even though the Environment Protection Act 1986 does not explicitly provide for the ecologically sensitive zone, however, under Section 3 of this particular act, the Ministry of Environment and Forest is empowered to regulate certain activities that can have an adverse impact on the biodiversity. Now coming to the concept of the no-go zone. The no-go zone is a zone where there is complete prohibition on certain human activities that can have an adverse impact on the biodiversity. Now some of the human activities that can be prohibited in the no-go zone include mining, quarrying, construction of industries, thermal power plants, etc. So one basic difference between the ecologically sensitive zone and the no-go zone is that most of the activities in the ecologically sensitive zone are of regulatory nature, whereas the activities in the no-go zone are prohibitive, where there is complete restriction on carrying out any kind of human activities that can have an adverse impact on the biodiversity. Now coming to the Parliamentary Committee on Government Assurances, usually during discussions on important bills or while replying to questions, the ministers give various kind of assurances and promises on the floor of the House. Hence, in order to ensure that such assurances and promises are met by the government, the Parliament has set up the Parliamentary Committee on the Government Assurances. So, the main role of this particular committee is to examine the assurances and promises given by the ministers, wherein this particular committee submits report to the Parliament on whether such assurances have been fulfilled by the government. And if one looks at the composition, in case of Lok Sabha, it has 15 members, whereas in Rajya Sabha, it has 10 members. Further, the term of this committee is for 1 year. And with respect to process of appointment, both the members as well as chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Government Assurances are nominated. So in case of Lok Sabha, they are nominated by the Lok Sabha Speaker, and in case of Rajya Sabha, they are nominated by the chairman of the Rajya Sabha. And one important point to be noted here is that the ministers are not eligible to be nominated as members of the Parliamentary Committee on the Government Assurances. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to the Parliamentary Committee. Now coming back to the question asked in the prelims 2016 and 18, if you look at the question asked in 2016, the question was Gadgil Committee report and Kasturi Rangan Committee report, sometimes seen in the news, are related to. And as we have discussed, the answer to this question is D. And if you look at the question asked in the prelims 2018, the answer to this question is B, that is Committee on Subordinate Legislation. Based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the Parliamentary Committee on Government Assurances. The first statement is, this committee examines the assurances and promises given by the ministers on the floor of the House. And as we have discussed, this particular statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, this committee consists of 22 members from both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because the Parliamentary Committee on Government Assurances is constituted in both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. and it is not a joint committee. Hence, in this regard, the correct answer to this question is A, that is one only. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.